Hi, I'm Krista Brady, and today I'll be talking to you more about the brain. We'll focus mostly today on the brainstem and the cerebellum. Before we get into that, there's one other thing about the cerebrum that I would like to discuss with you. Here we're looking at a transverse section of the cerebrum, and they've stained this a little bit differently than we're used to seeing it. So we've actually got the gray matter is actually looking more white here, and our white matter is looking more gray. But what we can see here is that we've got this rim of gray matter all the way around the cerebrum. This is the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex, that outer layer of gray matter, is where your conscious thought takes place, your conscious perception of sensations, your conscious commands to make voluntary movements, and so on. Those take place in that cerebral cortex. Now, within the cerebrum, we actually have areas of gray matter as well, like this one right here. So this is one of the basal nuclei. They have specific names, but we're just going to call them, for our class, we're just going to call them the collective name of basal nuclei. And so the basal nuclei, their main job is to help smooth out and initiate skeletal muscle movement, as well as to inhibit excessive movement. So damage to those can cause movement disorders like Huntington's disease. Now we're going to move on to other parts of the brain. So here's the brain. I'm going to pull this open so you can see the inner part of the brain. And in the last video, we talked about the cerebrum and we talked about the diencephalon. Now we're going to talk about the brain stem, which is this part right here. I'm going to pull over a bigger model so that we can see this in more detail, and it shows just the brain stem. So this model is focusing in just on that brain stem part. We can see a little bit of the insula from the cerebrum and the diencephalon, which are the part up here. This is all diencephalon. These are the two lobes of the thalamus. Okay? And then down here, all this part is the brainstem. So the brainstem has three parts to it. We have the uppermost part, which is kind of right below the diencephalon. This is called the midbrain. There are a couple of things you'll want to know about the midbrain. First is you can see these stalks that are kind of holding up the rest of the brain, holding up the cerebrum, you can think of it. These are the cerebral peduncles. The cerebral peduncles will connect the cerebrum to the brainstem, and they're actually going to carry a lot of motor tracts that are traveling down the brainstem with commands to your skeletal muscles. And then if I turn this brainstem around, so we've been looking at the anterior side, the front. If I turn this around to the posterior, you'll notice these four bumps. These four bumps, they look pretty similar to each other, right? They look like a set of quadruplets. They are the corpora quadrigemina, which literally means the four twin bodies, the corpora quadrigemina. And these are responsible for controlling visual and auditory reflexes. One other thing I'll point out about the midbrain, I'm going to pull this apart so we can look inside. So notice that there's this passageway. This is going right through the midbrain here. This is the cerebral aqueduct that we talked about in connection with the ventricles, those fluid-filled cavities inside the brain. So remember that cerebral aqueduct will connect the third ventricle, which is up in this area, to the fourth ventricle, which is not shown, but would be down in this area here. Okay, so moving down, we talked about the midbrain right here. Moving down, the next part of the brainstem is the pons, which is right here, and which has this nice big bulge towards the anterior. That's a great landmark for you. If you're looking at a sagittal section of the brain and you're trying to orient yourself, look for that big bulge of the pons. And then moving farther down, and the function of the pons is to fine-tune respiration and to help control micturition, which is the medical term for urination or relieving yourself. And then if we move farther down, the last part of the brainstem here, which is going to merge into the spinal cord, the last part of that brainstem is the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is actually a very important part of the brain for life. It controls a lot of essential functions like your heart rate and your breathing. It also has some non-essential centers that control things like vomiting, hiccuping, and sneezing as well. I'm going to show you what those parts of the brainstem look like on the outside as well. Okay, so once more, we've got the midbrain right up here. Then we've got the pons, and you can see that bulge towards the anterior. And then right below that, we've got the medulla oblongata. The brainstem has most of the cranial nerves coming off of it, so let's go ahead and talk about those cranial nerves. You can see cranial nerve 2 has been cut off right here. Cranial nerve 2 is the optic nerve. That one, it will innervate the retina of the eye, and it will carry visual information into your brain. Okay, moving below that, coming off of the midbrain, off of the front here, we can see the cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve, one on each side. And the oculomotor nerve is responsible for movement of the eyes. It innervates most of your extraocular eye muscles, like superior rectus, and inferior oblique, and medial rectus. We can also see that there is this one small nerve coming from the back of the midbrain here. Most of the cranial nerves come off of the front of the brainstem, but this one comes off of the back. This is cranial nerve 4, the trochlear nerve. That one innervates superior oblique. Moving down, we hit this large nerve here. And if this nerve continued, you would see that it would branch into 3 branches. This is trigeminal. Tri means 3, so that will remind you that this has 3 branches. And trigeminal has many functions. Most of its functions are sensory. It will carry general sensations from the face, including the eyes and the cornea, and your teeth for pain and heat, all those general senses, as well as the anterior 2/3 of your tongue for general sensations. Okay, continuing to move down, but now we're going to the midline here. This is cranial nerve 6, abducens. Abducens innervates the lateral rectus muscle. And then we'll go back out. 7 and 8 are right next to each other here. Cranial nerve 7 is the facial nerve. That one innervates most of the muscles of your face for voluntary facial expression, including orbicularis oris, orbicularis oculi, frontalis, zygomaticus major, and so on. It also has one very important sensory function, which is that it innervates the anterior 2/3 of your tongue for taste, that special sensation of taste. And then cranial nerve 8 right next to it. This one will go and innervate the inner ear for hearing. Okay, moving down, we'll hit cranial nerve 9 next, glossopharyngeal. The glossopharyngeal nerve innervates the posterior 2/3 of your tongue for taste and for general sensations like heat and temperature and pain and proprioception. And it also innervates it has some autonomic functions, including it will innervate the carotid sinuses in your carotid arteries, and it will sense conditions in your blood from there and carry that information into your brain. Okay, moving down farther, we've got cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve it's the only cranial nerve that wanders below the neck. Vagus means wanderer. And vagus has a lot of functions. It will innervate the pharynx, which is the upper part of your throat. It will innervate that for taste. And then it will also do a lot of autonomic functions, like it will carry sensations from your stomach and your esophagus and the aortic bodies above your heart. And it will also carry autonomic commands down to lots of your internal organs. Okay? So that's cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve. Moving down farther, we hit cranial nerve 11, the accessory nerve. This one is purely motor. It innervates skeletal muscles, including sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. And then we'll come back to the midline here for cranial nerve 12, the hypoglossal nerve. And this nerve is also purely motor. It will innervate the skeletal muscles of your tongue so that you can do voluntary movements with your tongue, including the movements that contribute to speech and to swallowing as well. So those are the cranial nerves. One more time, they do go in order. Cranial nerve 2, 3, 4 coming around from the back. 5 is the big one here. 6 is back at the midline. 7 and 8 paired right next to each other. 9, 10, 11, and then back to the midline for 12. The last part of the brain that we need to talk about is the cerebellum. So looking at the outside of the brain here, you can see this part right here, the cerebellum. And cerebellum means little brain, so it kind of looks like a smaller version of your whole large brain. Now, if I open this up so we can see the inside of this, one of the major things you'll notice about the cerebellum is all of this white matter inside of it. And it looks kind of like a tree. And all this white matter is called the arbor vitae, which literally means tree of life. So the arbor vitae refers to all of this white matter inside the cerebellum. And that's going to be carrying all that information into the cerebellum. The cerebellum's functions include balance and coordination, as well as other functions like timekeeping and controlling your impulses. So actually, kids with ADHD tend to have smaller cerebellums than kids without ADHD. Now, if we look at the outside of the cerebellum, you'll notice all of these ridges. These ridges have a special name. They're called folia. If you think of the word foliage, which means leaves on a tree, folia comes from the same word stem. So we've got a lot of tree-themed words here. Arbor vitae and folia, the ridges in the cerebellum. One other thing that I will point out, and I'm actually going to grab a different model for this last part. Okay, so this is our brainstem model again. And notice that we've got these areas of white matter right here. And they're cut off, but these are stalks that will connect the brainstem to the cerebellum. And these are called the cerebellar peduncles. The cerebellar peduncles. So be careful when you're talking about the cerebral peduncles, which are up here in the midbrain, and the cerebellar peduncles, because those terms are close, but they are different things, and they're named based on what they are connecting. So the cerebellar peduncles are connecting the cerebellum to the brainstem. So today I've taught you about the brainstem and all of its parts, as well as the cerebellum. Now go ahead and practice using the labeled and unlabeled images in your Learning Lab PowerPoints, and then you can apply these on the lab quizzes.